Hello there, this is part 2 of Lucy Letby, A Different Story. This section concerns the consultants and other doctors. And as I said before, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's just some summary points. And obviously there are many other ones we could use, but it's just some summary points with regard to the consultants and doctors at the COCH during this period. There are only 2 consultant ward rounds per week during the period. The neonatal ward was a level 2 unit. Obviously that resulted in suboptimal care, which in the trial many instances of suboptimal care were shown and proved to be the case. In respect of the consultants' involvement, they were outside safe guidelines. There is a great deal of evidence showing consultant, registrar, SHO, junior doctor, locum doctor failure to offer good, reliable and competent health care. A great deal of mistakes being made and failures in care with babies not being prescribed or not getting antibiotics for long periods of time, and not getting liquids for long periods of time, and many other problems in terms of basic procedures. I'm not saying they're easy procedures, but these people are trained to do them, and when you hear the examples of the doctor from Alderhay coming and inserting a catheter, umbilical catheter, very easy, and there's been 8 or 9, possibly even 10 attempts by, up to 6 doctors from the COCH. You get a sense of what the standard is there in terms of the doctors at the COCH. The doctor from Alderhay himself couldn't understand why they couldn't do the procedure. So there was that. There's the catheter insertion, but there's also the insertion of the intubation, actually. I think that was the example. There's issues with inserting catheters, and there's issues with intubating babies where there were up to there could have been more than 10, because there's one doctor tries it 4 times, and there are 6 doctors try it, 2 consultants, 2 anaesthetists apparently, and 2 junior doctors on the same baby this is, and then the doctor from Alderhay comes and does it first time and can't understand why none of the other doctors can intubate the baby. It's giving you a sense of what the level of care is there, and the competency of the consultants and the doctors. The senior consultant, Dr. Gibbs, was said to be rarely at the unit and would constantly need to be called on the telephone, we hear, by junior doctors who were inexperienced and basically left to run the ward, and very thin on the ground as well they were, and they didn't have the experience to look after these babies who were had intensive needs, so they kept on having to ring people who were at home. There is evidence of Gibbs's potential to be negligent in his practice. For example, when he failed to switch the baby monitoring machines back on after he'd turned them off. And he was accompanied by another doctor at that time, and neither of them thought to turn them back on. I think that gives you a bit of a sense of how, what can you say, how, the attention to detail, should we say. Yeah, it's pretty important, isn't it? It's a pretty big mistake to not do that. Based on the stats, the rate of deaths and stillbirths at the hospital reduced once Dr. Gibbs had retired. That's not anything to say that he did anything criminal, but we're looking at competency here and suboptimal care and medical error, medical negligence from the doctors. There is an alleged, moving to a different doctor now, there is alleged anecdotal evidence of Dr. Breary having a bullying manner and reducing his colleagues to tears on occasion. other colleagues, this is nurses, and women, most likely. It is anecdotal, but nonetheless it is there, and goes to the point that I made in the first part of this series, that of this pattern of bullying from men to women, senior men to women who perhaps were nurses or junior doctors. Dr. Jayaram seemed to be more focused on his media career than working as a paediatrician at the COCH, and there's evidence of suboptimal care regarding Dr. Jayaram, such as a chest drain put in the wrong place, which may have contributed to a baby's cardiac arrest. He denied that at the trial, but that was certainly the charge against him from the defence. Dr. Jayaram signed a letter of support for the disgraced paediatrician and court witness Roy Meadow, seeking to reinstate Meadow to the GMC, and that despite Meadow's horrendous record in sending several innocent women to prison based on his utterly worthless, incorrect and misleading evidence. Meadow's alleged expertise ensured several miscarriages of justice and led finally to the very early death of Sally Clark, who was destroyed by what Meadow had done to her through his absurd and obviously incorrect evidence. He was another danger, similar to Evans in this case. Dr. Jayaram, one of the Gang of Four, you've got the Gang of Four, Jayaram, Breary, Dr. B and Gibbs. So Dr. Jayaram, in his dubious role as a media doctor, as he'd always be asked, whether it's on television or via a newspaper, he actually called the supporters of the little child Alfie Evans, who was terminally ill and who desperately needed treatment that the NHS either could or wouldn't offer. He called the supporters of the family and Alfie Evans a 17th century witch-hunting lynch mob. That's how he spoke about those concerned people over that terminally ill child. Dr. Jayaram, again in his dubious role as a media doctor, he encouraged the uptake of the so-called COVID vaccines, which have proven to have been both ineffective and very harmful to a great number of people, if not fatal to very many people. But he's always there in the media. Dr. B, we don't know who she is, we know she's a female doctor, is said to have had a personal dislike of Nurse Letby, the nurse that's persecuted. And this was according to the persecuted nurse herself. There is evidence that consultants and other doctors struggle with certain medical procedures in relation to the neonatal ward, procedures which were simply undertaken by a doctor from a tertiary unit, Alder Hey. Overall, there's a sense of the doctors at the COCH being incompetent, really, and too few of them, and doing too few ward rounds, and often very inexperienced junior doctors being the only doctors available. Moving now to Dr. Breary. When Dr. Breary grew concerned at a cluster of deaths in June 2015, what he didn't do is that he didn't request the post-mortems to be reassessed, or an inquest performed in each case. You'd think he'd do that, wouldn't you, if he was that concerned that the deaths were suspicious. All he wanted to know was who was on duty. All the babies in this cluster, they were being suspected for sepsis and had signs of sepsis. And there was another crash of another baby outside of this cluster who's not part of the court case. But that was seemingly of no concern to Dr. Breary. And it's explicit that was a case of sepsis. It was explicitly diagnosed with sepsis. Yet Dr. Breary did not order a review and assessment of the pathogens that might be currently in the unit due to the hospital wastewater problems. He didn't engage with infection control protocols or order a deep clean of the unit and an assessment of how the disastrous plumbing might be spreading dangerous pathogens to the very vulnerable babies in the unit. He did nothing of that kind at all. Simply wanted to know who was on duty. He's got Very, very clear signs that there's a problem with sepsis on the ward. And doing nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. And that goes for the other consultants as well. Breary and later his colleagues Jairam, Gibbs and Dr. B began a campaign of persecution against an individual nurse. They had no evidence whatsoever she had harmed any babies, and there's no evidence to this day. And there's also no evidence at that time, nor to this day, that her clinical practice was under par. But there is evidence that their clinical practice is under par, and some of the nurses' practice was under par. Come to this Dr. A character. Dr. A was conducting, it must be said, an inappropriate friendship with a much younger nurse, and he would later join the persecutors of this nurse by appearing as a witness for the prosecution. As more deaths and crashes occurred over 2015-2016, not one of the consultants seemed to want to get to the bottom of what happened to the babies. They didn't question the post-mortems, which all said natural causes. They did not request an inquest into any of the cases. They simply attempted to put the blame on an individual nurse merely because she was on duty, when some, considerably less than half, of these deaths occurred. And this nurse was clearly only on duty for a portion of the crashes as well. And they didn't seem concerned about the deaths and crashes that occurred where the nurse that they were persecuting was not on duty. There's an obvious spike there. Even if you take out all the deaths and crashes that are blamed on Lucy, there's still a spike there. And they're not concerned about those cases at all. And neither is Evans. The gang of 4 doctors signed apology letters to the nurse that they'd been persecuting. What does that actually say about their belief that babies were being murdered on the ward? And if they really believed that, they would have gone to the police themselves. Breary would have gone to the police himself over a year before. Well, over 2 years before, actually. Well, coming up to 2 years before, in August or September 2015. It doesn't stack up, any of this. They were persecuting an individual nurse, and they ran with that, and it built up and up and up, until they were warned by the chief executive that they were crossing a line, and they were shamed into writing apology letters, which they should have done. They should have, and meant them. They obviously didn't mean them. Breary didn't even want to meet with Lucy Letby for a mediation session, but Jairam did. It is my personal belief that if the consultant Breary, he's an alleged bully to other staff, had had his way in the summer of 2015, and had the nurse he was persecuting been removed from the ward, or else had she herself just moved on due to the bullying, or gone off sick, or changed her job, just folded under his bullying and his persecution, we would never have heard about this case in any way whatsoever. There would have been no police involvement, no case, no investigation, no trial, nothing. Because these deaths were due to a whole host of problems on that ward, principally sepsis, and a chaotic environment, chronically understaffed, with quite a number of incompetent doctors there. Medical negligence cases, which were all in the offing in early 2017, all about to start just when the police got involved. So yes, we would have heard nothing about this had Lucy Letby left the ward in 2015, instead of sticking up for herself as she did, instead of bringing a grievance complaint as she did. Might have even been the case, had she have gone in 2016, they would have let it all go. That tells you that they know there were no crimes there. They wouldn't have done anything about it. It would have gone. They just wanted her gone. But what there would have been eventually is a very large number, and a growing number, of medical negligence claims against the hospital. There's a lot of other things you can say about the doctors. I mean, this ridiculous idea of a motive that Lucy Letby was doing it in order to get attention from Dr. A. Across all the crashes and deaths where Lucy Letby was suspected, he's only available for less than a quarter of them. He's not there. So it's just absurd. It's just a ridiculous reach, because they know they had no motive. So they just put that absurd motive in there. There are many other things you could say, but I think I'll leave it there. It's just a sense of a little bit of a summary around what some of these, the character and the inconsistencies and the strange behaviour of these consultants. You begin to see how they've acted en masse against one person. You can see it as a scapegoating and a targeting of an individual. And they were wanting to protect themselves. And they were no doubt angry, very angry in 2016 when the RCPCH report came out, which didn't blame any nurses, didn't blame the nurse that they'd been persecuting at all. In fact, it commended her clinical abilities. But it criticised them and it criticised the hospital as a whole, and it downgraded the unit. And so they were really, really angry then. And then once the nurse that had been persecuting takes a grievance process out, their anger and their narcissistic rage ramps up even further. They're forced to apologise. The chief executive says, you're bringing your profession into disrepute. You're going to be reported to the GMC for this. That really, really, that they want to go in for the kill. Then the doctors, want to go in for the kill, and they want to destroy this very good and conscientious nurse. They just won't have it that they've been made to apologise. That's what you call narcissistic rage. That's what it is. And they got what they wanted in the end. But what they've done is criminal. And it's morally repulsive. And they know it. Whether they care about it is another matter. I doubt they care. There's something wrong with them. I'll leave it there. Thank you.